This is the Omnivore's Dilemma, Young Reader's Edition, Chapter 20, Hunting. Starting on page 267. Hunting is exciting. It embarrasses me to write that, but it's true. I discovered this the first time I went into a forest with a loaded rifle. Hunting makes everything sharper, more vivid. It made me pay attention like nothing else I have ever done. As I walk out on my hunt, I notice how the breezes move the pine needles. Their shadows wave on the tree trunks and the forest floor. I notice the way the air feels. My eyes search deep into thickets, looking for the slightest hint of movement. I listen carefully to every little noise, the cracking of a branch or, wait, what was that? Just a bird. Angelo, my hunting tutor, has taught me how to read the ground for signs of pig. Notice the freshly dug soil at the base of that oak tree? It's still wet. The sun hasn't dried it out yet. This means pigs have been rooting here overnight. See that smoothly scooped out puddle of water? That's a wallow. But notice how the water is perfectly clear. Pigs haven't disturbed it yet. We could wait here for them. After hunting here for years, Angelo knows there are 3 groups of pigs sharing the oak forest in Northern California where he took me hunting. Each group visits a slightly different set of good pig places. This grove of oaks is where they dig for acorns, roots, and grubs. In the afternoon heat, they snooze in the dusty dirt beneath that tangle of manzanita trees. They cool off in those muddy wallows, leaving the marks of their hoof prints. Then they scrape the mud from their backs on that pine tree there, the one where the lower bark is rubbed smooth and tan. Part of me did not want to go hunting. The night before, I had nightmares. In one dream, I was on a bobbing boat trying to shoot a destroyer that was firing its cannons at me. In another, the woods were crawling with Angelo's Sicilian relatives. In that dream, I couldn't remember how my gun worked, if the safety was on or off. I had tried out my rifle only once before taking it to the woods, at a firing range in the Oakland Hills. By the end of the morning, my paper target didn't show much damage, but my left shoulder ached for a week. I wasn't ready to buy a gun of my own, so Angelo had borrowed a fairly basic pump-action rifle, a .27 Winchester. I had been worried that I wouldn't have the nerve to fire at an animal, and after my session at the range, I began to worry that if I did fire, I would miss completely. The plan was to hunt boar in the countryside north of San Francisco. A friend of Angelo's has a 1,000-acre property up there, and Angelo has permission to hunt on it. We could have hunted for deer, or turkey, or duck, but I felt more comfortable going for wild pig. The animal's not native, and is regarded as a pest in many parts of California. That made it easier for me. Wild pigs can be pretty nasty. One of their nicknames in California is Dog Ripper. They destroy farmland and forest by ripping up the ground with their digging, or rooting as it's called. So I had a good excuse for hunting pigs. But I also had another reason. I like pork, and since moving to California, I'd often heard how tasty wild pigs are. When I asked Angelo why he hunted wild pig, he didn't hesitate. He just kissed the tip of his fingers and said, "Because it is the most delicious meat, and there is nothing that tastes so good as boar prosciutto." Prosciutto is a kind of ham. You'll see. You shoot a big one and we'll make some. In a sense, that's what Angelo was really hunting. Not pigs so much as prosciutto. Maybe because he's been hunting his whole life, he doesn't talk about the thrill of it all. For me, it's about the eating, not the sport, he told me. I am not what you call a trophy hunter. I take what I need, enough to make a nice dinner for me and my friends, maybe some salami and prosciutto, but then that's it, I go home. On my first hunt with Angelo, we were joined by Richard, the owner of the property, and Angelo's friend Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre hadn't hunted in years, although he had grown up hunting boar with his relatives in northern France. He had on one of those green felt alpine hats with a feather and a pair of tall black riding boots. Richard had on a full orange hunter's outfit, and I was wearing my brightest orange sweater. Hunters wear bright clothing so other hunters won't mistake them for a wild pig or a deer. We divided into pairs, me with Angelo. Our plan was to meet back at the cars for lunch around noon. Jean-Pierre and Richard walked off into the lower forest. Angelo and I Angelo and I rode up to the top of a grassy ridge on his four-wheel drive ATV. The bike made a racket, but Angelo claimed it didn't bother the pigs and would allow us to cover a lot more ground than we could go on foot. "You are going to kill your first pig today!" Angelo shouted over the roar of the engine. Given the nature of hunting, not to mention me, I understood this as less a prediction than a prayer. After a while, we parked the bike and set out on foot. Angelo told me to head for a wallow in a grassy opening at the bottom of a ravine. When I got close, I was to find a tree with a good view of it and wait there, perfectly still, for 20 minutes until I heard him whistle. He would make his way toward the same spot from another direction in the hopes of driving some pigs towards me. When I was alone, I could hear Angelo's footsteps no more. I fell into that state of extreme alertness I described earlier. It was as if I dialed up the volume on all my senses. I heard every little sound. I could see farther into the woods than I ever had before, picking up the tiniest movements. It was as if I had put on a new, strong pair of glasses for the first time. Hunter's eye, Angelo called it when I told him about it later. It was a completely different feeling than I get from just walking through the woods on a hike. It was the difference between being a spectator at a ball game and one of the players. It was the difference between being a tourist and belonging to a place. I felt part of the forest instead of just a visitor. We saw no pigs that morning, and around noon we met back at the cars as planned. Jean-Pierre had shot a small boar and Angelo hung it from a nearby branch. Then we turned to eating. Being Europeans, Angelo and Jean-Pierre take lunch very seriously, even when out in the woods. So I brought with me a few things to nibble on," Jean-Pierre mumbled. "Me too," chimed Angelo, and out of their packs came course after course of the most astonishing picnic. They laid the feast on the hood of Angelo's SUV. There was gelled lobster and halibut, homemade salami, prosciutto and mortadella, homemade pâté of boar, home-cured olives, chicken salad, a generous selection of cheeses and breads, fresh strawberries, pastries, and naturally a bottle each of red and white wine. It was a delicious lunch, but it took off some of my hunter's edge. After lunch, Angelo stayed behind to dress the small pig, and Jean-Pierre laid down in the grass for a nap. I was feeling pretty relaxed when Richard and I set off to look for another pig. Our rifles slung over our shoulders, we strolled down a shady trail and chatted as we talked. My attention floated away from the woods and the hunt. Until I happened to glance up and saw directly in front of us, not 30 yards away, 4 large black shapes in the shadows. There they were, 4 pigs milling beneath an oak tree, eating acorns off the forest floor. They gave no sign that they'd spotted us or heard our yammering. I grabbed Richard by the shoulder, put my finger to my lips, and pointed ahead. He stopped. "It's your shot," he whispered. "Go ahead, take it." It's the custom when hunting that the first shot belongs to the person who spotted the animal. These pigs were mine. One little problem. I had neglected to pump my rifle before we set out on the trail. There was no bullet in the chamber, and to cock my gun now would make a loud noise. The pigs would be on the run by the time I was ready to shoot. I explained all this in a whisper to Richard, who, unlike me, was ready. I gave him my shot. Richard got down on one knee and slowly raised his rifle to his shoulder. I braced for the explosion, preparing to pump my gun at the moment it came. Richard took his time, aiming carefully. The pigs had their heads down, eating acorns. Then the woods exploded. I saw a pig stagger and fall, then struggled drunkenly to its feet. I pumped my rifle, but it was already too late. The other pigs were gone. Richard fired again at the wounded pig, and it fell. By the time we ran up to it, it was already dead. I felt a rush that made me lightheaded and shaky. The pig was a sow, weighing perhaps 100 pounds. She was too heavy to carry, so we took turns dragging her by her rear legs back towards the cars. Holding the pig by the ankle, I could still feel her warmth beneath the bristly skin. When we got to the cars, Angelo trotted over to see the animal, excited and eager to hear our story. As we told him what had happened, I could see the disappointment on his face. It had been my shot, my pig, but I hadn't taken it. You weren't ready, Angelo said in a level voice. In hunting, you always need to be ready. So okay, you learned something today. Next time you will be ready, and you will take your shot. He was trying hard not to sound like a disappointed father. I couldn't help feeling like the disappointing son. I spent the rest of the afternoon hunting alone, walking the ridge, searching the shadows for signs of pig, looking and listening as hard as I could to will another animal out of the woods. When Angelo announced it was time to go home, I felt deflated. Well, I had gone hunting. Plus, Jean-Pierre offered me some cuts from his pig, so I had some meat for my meal. But I hadn't done what I'd set out to do, kill my own food. So I asked Angelo if I could go with him again. He called me about a month later, said to meet him on a Monday morning, 6 o'clock sharp. We would be going back to Richard's property again, and this time it would be just the two of us. We spent the first part of the morning going to all of Angelo's pig spots. Believe me, I made sure I had a round in my chamber. It was hotter than last time, so Angelo felt the pigs would be keeping to the shadier parts of the property. We staked out a wallow deep in the woods and then a clearing of ferns, but saw no signs of pig. A little after 9 in the morning, we were walking together down a logging road deep into a steep hillside. Then we heard it. We were stopped in our tracks by a grunt so loud and deep that it seemed to be coming from the bowels of the earth. A very big pig was very close by. But where? What direction to look? We crouched down low, and I listened as hard as I've ever listened for anything before. The next sound we heard was the sharp, clean crack of a branch coming from above us to our right. I looked up to the top of the thickly wooded hillside, and that's when I saw it, a rounded black form coming over the top of the hill. Then another shape and another, a total of 5 or 6, I couldn't be sure. I touched Angelo on the shoulder and pointed toward the pigs. What should I do? Should I shoot? No, you wait, Angelo said. See, they're coming down the hill now. I followed the pigs with the barrel of my gun, trying to get one of them in my sight. I didn't have a clear shot. Too many trees stood in the way. So take your time, Angelo whispered. They will come to us. And so they did, right down to the road directly in front of us. I have no idea how long it took the pigs to pick their way down the steep hill, whether it was minutes or just seconds. At last, the first animal, a big black one, stepped out into the clearing of the dirt road, followed by another that was just as big but much lighter in color. The second pig turned, giving me a shot at its flank. Now, Angelo whispered, this is your shot. We both got down on one knee. I braced the rifle against my shoulder and lined up my sight. I felt calmer and clearer than I expected to as I took aim at the shoulder of the grayish pig. I held my breath, resisted a sudden urge to clamp my eyes shut, and gently squeezed. The crystal stillness of the scene exploded. The pigs ran in a panic, moving every which way at once, and then the blam of Angelo's shot directly behind me made me jump. One pig was down, another seemed to stagger. I pumped my gun to fire again, but I was so excited that I pulled the trigger before I could lower my gun. The shot went wild, far over the heads of the rioting pigs. Angelo fired again, and so did I. Then they were gone. We ran forward to the downed animal, a very large grayish sow, sprawled on her side across the dirt road. A glossy bubble of blood grew directly beneath her ear. The pig thrashed briefly, attempting to lift her head up, then gave it up. Death was quickly overtaking her. I was relieved she wouldn't need a second shot. We ran past her, looking for the others. Angelo said he thought he'd grazed another one. I climbed down the embankment looking for it, but the hill was too steep, and Angelo called me back up to the road. He clapped me on the back. Your first pig! Look at the size of it! And with a perfect shot right in the head. You did it! Did I do it? Was that really my shot? I had my doubts. Yet Angelo insisted he had fired at a different pig, a black one. No, this is your pig, Michael. You killed it. There's no doubt in my mind. You got yourself a big one. That's some very nice prosciutto. I wasn't ready to see it as meat, though. What I saw was a dead, wild animal, its head lying on the dirt in a widening circle of blood. I kneeled down, and pressed the palm of my hand against the pig's belly above the nipples. Beneath the dusty, bristly skin, I felt her warmth, but no heartbeat. I was overcome with a strong mix of emotions. The first was a powerful feeling of pride. I had actually done what I'd set out to do. I had successfully shot a pig. I felt a flood of relief, too, that the deed was done, thank God, and didn't need to be done again. And then there was this wholly unexpected feeling of thankfulness. For my good fortune, I guess, and to Angelo, of course, but also to this animal, for stepping over the crest of that hill and into my sight to become what Angelo kept calling her, your pig. I felt it wasn't my skill that had brought me this animal. It was a gift, from whom or what I couldn't say, and thankfulness is what I felt. There was one emotion I expected to feel, but did not. I felt no sorrow or remorse. Those would come later, but at that moment, I'm slightly embarrassed to admit, I felt absolutely terrific, completely happy. Angelo wanted to take my picture, so he posed me behind my pig, one hand cradling the rifle across my chest, the other resting on the animal. I thought I should look serious for the picture, but I couldn't stop smiling. The happy excitement didn't last. Less than an hour later, I was hugging the pig's carcass as it hung from the limb of an oak. My job was to hold it steady while Angelo reached in and pulled out the guts. We had used a block and tackle and 2 hooks to raise the pig by its rear ankles. A scale attached to the rig gave the weight of the animal, 190 pounds. The pig weighed exactly as much as I did. Dressing the pig meant getting closer to it than I really wanted. Angelo made a shallow cut across the pig's belly and began to gently work the hide loose. I held down a narrow flap of skin while he cut into the fat behind it, leaving as much of the creamy white layer as possible. "This is really good fat," Angelo explained, "for the salami." The flap of skin grew larger as we worked our way down the body and then slowly pulled it down over the pig's shoulders. The inside-out skin looked like a sweater coming off. What hunters call dressing an animal is really an undressing. As we drew the skin down over the rib cage, it exposed the bullet, or what remained of the bullet. It had passed through the animal and torn a ragged slot in the left rib, where it came to rest just beneath the hide. "Here's a souvenir for you," Angelo said, pulling the bloody, mangled chunk of metal from the bone like a tooth and handing it to me. Using a short knife, Angelo made another shallow cut the length of the animal's belly. He talked while he worked, mostly about the dishes he would make from the different parts of the pig. I could not believe Angelo was still talking about food. The pig was splayed open now. I could see all its organs, the bluish intestine and the spongy pink pair of lungs. I'd handled plenty of chicken guts on Joel's farm, but this was different and more disturbing. That was probably because the pig's internal organs looked exactly like human organs. I held the cavity open while Angelo reached in to pull out the liver, for a nice pâté. He cut it free and dropped it into a Ziploc bag. Then he reached in and pulled, and the rest of the guts tumbled out into the ground in a heap. There was a stench so awful it made me gag. It was a mix of pig manure and piss with an odor of death. I felt a wave of sickness begin to build in my gut. I still had my arms wrapped around the pig from behind, but I told Angelo I wanted to take a picture. What I really wanted was a breath of fresh air. The disgust I felt was so strong, I wondered how I could ever eat this animal now. How could I serve it to my friends? Some of the disgust I felt made sense. After all, part of the stench was from the waste in the pig's intestines. But it was more than that. When we kill an animal, especially a big animal like a pig, it can't help reminding us of our own death. The line between their bodies and ours, between their deaths and ours, is not very sharp. I recovered from my disgust enough to help Angelo finish dressing my pig. Yet the emotions did not go away. They really hit me late that evening. Back at home, I opened my email and saw that Angelo had sent me some pictures under the subject heading, "Look, the Great Hunter." I was eager to open them, excited to show my family my pig. It was hanging in Angelo's walk-in cooler. The image that appeared on my computer screen hit me like an unexpected blow to the body. A hunter in an orange sweater is kneeling on the ground behind a pig. From the pig's head comes a narrow river of blood, spreading out toward the bottom of the frame. The hunter's rifle is angled just so across his chest. One hand rests on the dead animal's broad flank. The man is looking into the camera with a broad, happy grin. I looked from the dead, bloody pig to the big, happy grin on the man's face. My face. Then I hurried my mouse to the corner of the image and clicked, closing it as quickly as I could. What could I possibly have been thinking? What was the man in that picture feeling? What was I so damn proud of anyway? Suddenly I felt ashamed. I had set out to do something new and difficult for me. I had messed up the first time I tried it. Now I had succeeded, and it made complete sense that I would feel relief and pride. I was okay with that. But was it okay to feel joy over another creature's death? I was confronted with yet another dilemma. What exactly is the joy of hunting? I know it made me feel good when I was out in the woods. I enjoyed feeling totally alive and a part of nature. I enjoyed discovering new abilities that I didn't know I had. I enjoyed succeeding in my difficult task. However, I also knew what made me feel bad about hunting. No matter how I looked at it, I felt regret about killing that pig. The animal is at once different from me, and yet, as a living creature, it is the same. Maybe this is an important part of hunting too. Hunters ought to be aware of the seriousness of what they are doing, and never treat it lightly. I went hunting to kill a pig and turn it into meat, but I realized that I was looking for more than that. When I started my journey down the food chains of our society, I wanted to look at things as they really are. I did not want to look away from the reality. The hardest thing that I had been looking at was where our meat comes from. Now I had seen it up close and personal as you can get. There was no industrial or organic food chain here. It was just me and my food. There was one other picture Angelo sent me. I didn't look at it until sometime later. This was the picture I took of Angelo cleaning my pig when I needed to break away. It's a simple snapshot of the pig hanging from the tree. You can see in that one frame the animal and the butcher and the oak tree against the sun-filled sky and the pig-plowed earth. In that single picture, you could see an entire food chain. There is the oak tree standing in the sun. On the ground are the acorns the tree made with the sunlight. There is the pig that ate the acorns and the man preparing the pig to be eaten. I had started out to see exactly where our food came from, and now I had. The man in that photo did not just create that food chain, he was part of it. Just as the tree took in the sunlight and the pig ate the acorns, the man is taking his nourishment from that natural cycle. In the end, whatever we think or feel, triumph or shame, that is the way it is.